Alright, so our topic this week is the first part of chords. Now, chords are really how we build music, how we create our patterns. Usually when you're writing a piece of music, you start with a chord progression. You start with and then you build a melody like, and then you add the melody on top of that so that it fits in with the chords. But really, to understand chords, it's not too difficult. You just sort of takes time to get the vocabulary down. So in this episode, we're going to cover two major types of chords. We're going to cover triads, like, and we're going to cover seventh chords, like things like, things like that, because those are really the two most common things you'll find. In the next episode, we're going to get to things like tensions and extensions so that you can have your chords sound like this, or But this is the most basic vocabulary, and it's what you really need to know to get started with chords. So we're going to get going on that. Alright, so starting with chords, we have three basic triads that we build all of our chords on. The first one is a major triad. Let's do this in C major. That was A major. That's really the simplest. It's got a major third, a perfect fifth. You don't have to alter anything. You don't have to, if you're working off of a major scale, you don't have to change anything, and it's really the simplest thing we do. The next one we have is our minor triad. And for the minor triad, you're simply going to just lower the third from the major triad. So your major triad, your minor triad. Major triad, minor triad. Next is going to be a diminished triad. Let's do it in C, sorry. It's awkward to do on a guitar. Triads in general are a little awkward on guitar. But on piano, it's pretty simple. And you get that by lowering the third, like we did in our minor chord, and then lowering the fifth, so that you have a minor third and a diminished fifth. Or if you want to think of it, you just go a minor third, and then up another minor third. Like if you do that for the first two chords, a major chord, you go up a major third, and then up a minor third, and then diminished chord, minor chord, you go up a minor third, and up a major third. And the next chord we have is the augmented chord, which is sort of how the diminished chord is built on stacking minor thirds is minor third, minor third. The augmented chord is major third, major third. So you just would take your major chord and raise the fifth a half step. And that's really how we build all of our chords off of those four. Like if I take a really cool chord that I use a lot, like D major, D7, sharp 9, sharp 5. It's based off of this chord here, because I have my major third and my raised fifth. I have a few other things in there that we'll get to when we go to seventh chords and in the next episode when we talk about extensions and tensions. But like using those chords is how we base everything. Our minor seventh chords is of course based off our minor. Our major seventh chord is based off of our dominant seventh chord is based off of that. Diminished chords speak for themselves, as do augmented chords. Now we're gonna go. We're gonna go over to seventh chords now, and there are 5 kinds of seventh chords that show up a lot, and one seventh chord, which is the one in parenthesis over there, that doesn't show up as often, but I think is very cool, and we'll talk about that one last. But the first one is our major seventh chord. We've probably all heard this. It's just the... Sort of probably the first jazz chord most people learn. You know, it's from classical. It's just pretty simple chord. That's going to act as 1 or 4 in a major scale. It's very harmonized. It's very simple. It's usually just the thing you're trying to come back to if you're in a major key. The next chord we're going to talk about is a dominant 7 chord. And that's used by, we take our major 7 chord and just lower the 7th a half step. So we have our major triad with a minor 7th on it instead of a major 7th. And this is sort of a chord that gets used a lot in music if you have, your blues. Really the chord that you base that whole thing off of, and it's what usually is if you're going 1, 2, 5, 1. It's usually the chord that leads back to 1. Now our next chord, our minor 7th chord, is in our continuing to just add things. You start with your major 7th, we flat the 7th, and then we flat the 3rd. So we have our minor triad with a minor 7th on it. You see we started with our major 7, lower the 7th to get a dominant 7, and lower the 3rd to get a minor 7. And this you can use for anything that would have a minor triad except for one situation, which is our little parenthesis down there that we're going to get to at the end of this little bit. So after our minor 7, which you use quite a lot, you can use this over dominant chords, you can use it over a lot of things. After our minor 7th, our next thing we have is this one. It has a bunch of writing under it, which is our minor 7 flat 5, or our half diminished 7th chord. And why it's a half diminished 7th chord? Because it's built on this diminished triad, but it doesn't have a fully diminished 7th. It only has a minor 7th on it, which is why it's half diminished, or a minor 7 with a flat 5, because it has the root, the minor 3rd, and the minor 7th, but instead of a perfect 5th, it's got a diminished 5th. That usually can act leading back to 1, or leading to a 5 with a tension on it. And that's a very cool chord. Now, a diminished 7th chord, which is one of my personal favorites, is, again, we take our half diminished 7th that we just had, and then we just lower the 7th. Now, the cool thing about the fully diminished 7th chord is that it's, again, kind of like our diminished triad we had here, stacking minor thirds. You're just going minor 3rd, minor 3rd, minor 3rd, minor 3rd. So, yeah. Which is very cool in my opinion, and it also means you can move this chord around quite a lot, because if you go up a minor third, it's still going to be the same chord, because you're just doing minor thirds. That's how you get that one of those stereotypical, you know, oh, it's so dramatic. Yeah, the things. Alright, so these are the ones that show up commonly. These are the ones that show up diatonically in scales, at least in our major scale and our mixed Lydian mode, which we'll get into in a couple episodes. I think after I talk about chords for 2 episodes, I'm going to start talking about modes and other scales and things like that. This little guy on the end here is one of my personal favorites. It's a minor major 7th chord, and it acts as the 1 chord or the root chord in harmonic and melodic minor, in those funny minor scales that we went over last time, you know, the scales, because it's got our minor triad with a major 7th, so it sounds kind of like this. It's a very tense chord, but I think it's a very nice sounding chord, and if you know the song My Funny Valentine, just has that chord in it. It's a very nice chord. Actually, quite technically speaking, Stairway to Heaven has that chord in it, but we're not going to get into that right now. Stairway to Heaven is sort of My Funny Valentine. But those are basically what you need to know about chords. Those are types of chords that we're going to use. Our vocabulary of chords is going to be based on using and sort of altering and adding tensions and extending these chords here. Now, one last thing I can do to chords in order to make them a little cooler, make them fit into more situations, really change their voicings to make them more what I want, is I can invert them. So if I take my major chord right here, I can invert that by saying, okay, usually I go whatever, the C, E, G, 1, 3, 5, and work it that way because that's what's root position. It's the simplest. But I can go like, okay, I'm going to put my E in the bass, my E at the bottom, then my G, then my C, and suddenly we get this whole new sound out of that. We get doesn't that just sound? It just provides you with such a larger vocabulary and a larger way to change things. You can do that with any chord. I can do that with the minor chord if I put my E flat there. Then I get, you know, this sound. Pretty tense, I think. And you can do that with 7th chords as well. If I, you know, take my minor 7th chord, so I've got, and put that, you know, with my 3rd down there, E flat, G, E flat, C. Suddenly I have, instead of having, you know, my C minor 7 chord that I had before, I have just a pretty major sound to it. This actually becomes an E flat major 6 chord, which is something I'll get to in extensions in the next episode. But yeah, you can just change chords by changing the order that you put the notes in, like, and that works for like common jazz voicings. Really rearrange these orders. Like the most common voicing, if you're just doing, you know, like just something just something like that. Like my major 7 chord, I'm gonna go 1, then 7, then 3, and 5. Just changing the order of the notes really affects how it sounds and what it means. And I think that's very cool. Alright, so just a few last minute things here. Like I always say, if you have something that you want me to teach or that you want me to spend more time on or that you're still confused about, send me a comment, send me a message, just tell me, and please subscribe if you want to see more theory stuff.